Morning light crawled across the Smoky Mountains like a slow-moving tide, brushing the fog into thin silver streaks as Evan Mercer, 13, tightened the straps of his hiking pack. He stood quietly beside the family car, watching his father flip through a map he didn't really need. Daniel had hiked these trails dozens of times, but something about him felt unsettled that morning, like his mind was pacing faster than his feet ever could. Evan noticed it instantly. His father usually talked during the first mile of every trip, stories about old campsites, warnings about unpredictable slopes, or jokes that never landed but still made Evan smile. Today, Daniel hadn't said anything besides a curt, "Let's go." Daylight's wasting. As they began the ascent, dry leaves crunched beneath their boots, echoing too loudly in the quiet forest. For a while, they moved in silence. Evan tried to match his father's long strides, though the air felt colder than usual for early fall, and the forest strangely empty. Even the birds stayed quiet. "Dad," Evan finally asked, "why are we taking the Ridgeback Trail? I thought we were doing the usual loop." Daniel kept walking. "Change of plans." "No reason," Evan pressed. Daniel slowed slightly, but didn't turn around. "Just needed someplace less crowded." The answer felt rehearsed, too quick, too tight. Evan swallowed his unease. He had learned over the years not to push when Daniel's voice shifted into that brittle tone. As they reached a clearing, the wind sharpened, carrying the faint smell of rain. A storm warning had been issued the night before, but Daniel had brushed it off, promising they'd be back long before any weather rolled in. Now, clouds pressed low over the peaks like a warning written across the sky. Evan paused to take a sip of water. He glanced at his father, noticing the way Daniel kept checking his phone even though the signal bars were dead. His hands shook slightly each time he pushed the screen awake. "Who keeps calling you?" Evan asked. Daniel finally looked at him, an uneasy, almost startled stare. "No one you need to worry about." The forest rustled, wind stirring branches overhead. Evan tugged his jacket closer. "Mom said you haven't been sleeping." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Your mother talks too much." It wasn't anger in his voice, more like fear dressed as irritation. Evan had seen that look once before, years ago, during a night when Daniel thought someone was following their car home. He had locked all the doors, shut off the radio, and driven in complete silence until they reached town. Evan never forgot how tightly Daniel's fingers gripped the steering wheel. The memory sat heavy now. They continued deeper into the trail. The trees thickened, swallowing the daylight. At noon, they reached a rocky overlook, the valley stretching out below like a carved-out bowl of mist. Daniel set his pack down and leaned over his knees, breathing hard. "You okay?" Evan asked. "Fine," Daniel answered, but his voice cracked. "Just thinking." "About what?" Daniel hesitated, scanning the tree line as if expecting someone to step out of it. "Evan," he said quietly, "what would you do if you had to choose between staying safe and staying with someone you loved?" Evan stiffened. "Why would I have to choose?" "No reason," Daniel muttered, rubbing his temples. "Forget I said anything." But Evan couldn't forget. The words stuck like burrs in his mind. The wind grew colder. Dark clouds rolled steadily over the peaks. Thunder murmured in the distance. "Maybe we should head back," Evan suggested. Daniel stared down the trail, the direction they came from, and flinched. "No, not that way. We keep moving." "Dad, I said we keep moving." The sudden harshness made Evan step back. Daniel's eyes darted again toward the forest behind them. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and Evan felt it swell in his chest like a trapped breath he couldn't release. As they started down the narrowing ridge path, the first drops of rain hit the leaves. Evan pulled his hood up. Daniel didn't. He just kept walking, faster than before, as if trying to outpace something unseen. By the time the storm broke full force, father and son had vanished into the mountains. And neither would be seen again. Not for another month. Claire Mercer always said she could feel things before they happened. Shifts in the air, changes in people, cracks forming in her marriage long before anyone else noticed. But nothing prepared her for the silence that settled over the house the evening Daniel and Evan failed to return. Rain hammered the kitchen windows, blurring the trees outside into dark smears. The clock above the sink ticked too loudly, marking every minute past the promised check-in time. Claire wiped her hands on a towel for the 10th time, even though she hadn't touched anything. Her phone lay on the table. She had already checked it dozens of times. Screen on, screen off, notifications empty, voicemail box silent. Maybe there's no signal up there, she whispered to herself. Maybe they stopped to wait out the storm. But deep inside her, something twisted. At 7:43 p.m., her phone finally rang. She leapt for it, breath catching, only to hear the shaking voice of the ranger on duty informing her that Daniel and Evan had not returned to the trailhead. Their car remained in the parking lot. The storm was worsening. "Ma'am," the ranger said gently, "we're not saying anything's wrong. But we'd like to start a preliminary sweep." "Do it," Claire whispered. "Please." She hung up and pressed her palms to her face. The house felt too large, too hollow. Evan's cereal bowl from breakfast still sat in the sink, a half-finished drawing on the table where he'd been doodling little mountain ridges. Claire traced her fingers over the lines of the drawing, willing the world to rewind just one day. As lightning flashed, she grabbed her keys and drove to the ranger station. Her hands shook on the steering wheel the whole way. Memories flickered through her mind like broken film. Daniel promising he'd work on being present, Evan's laugh echoing through the hallway, the strained breakfasts lately where no one said much at all. Inside the station, everything smelled like wet leather and old coffee. Rangers huddled around maps spread across a long table. One of them, Ranger Lewis, approached her. "We're sending 2 teams out," he explained. "But with this storm, visibility's bad. We may have to pause overnight for safety." Claire gripped the edge of the table. "Daniel knows those trails. He wouldn't take risks." Lewis hesitated. "The Ridgeback Trail isn't exactly beginner-friendly." Her stomach dropped. "Ridgeback?" He said they were taking the hollow loop. "That's not the direction their car was facing." Claire shook her head. "No. He wouldn't change the plan without telling me." Lewis exchanged a quiet glance with another ranger, a silent communication Claire wasn't meant to see. The storm intensified, rattling the windows as teams prepared for the sweep. Claire sank into a hard wooden chair, staring at the map. She'd hiked Ridgeback years ago, before Evan was born, before Daniel's late nights and mood swings had become part of their normal. She could still picture the steep drop-offs, the narrow ledges, the way mist could swallow the path without warning. Her phone buzzed. She snatched it up, but it was only a friend checking in. Claire tried to focus on the comforting words, but they slipped right through her. Hours passed. Officers came and went. Radios crackled with static. No sign of Daniel. No sign of Evan. Around midnight, Ranger Lewis approached her again. "We located a temporary campsite. Looks like they stopped before the storm got worse. Are they there?" Claire asked, voice trembling. "No. But we found some of their things. We'll start a deeper search at first light." "What things?" she pressed. Lewis hesitated. "We'd rather discuss it in the morning." Claire's pulse spiked. "Tell me." He exhaled. "A torn section of a backpack, and something that suggests they may have been in a hurry." Claire felt the room tilt. "In a hurry? But what happened?" "We don't know yet," he admitted. "But we'll find them." Claire nodded numbly, though her vision blurred. She clutched her phone, desperate for it to ring, desperate for Evan's voice, Daniel's voice, any voice that would break the nightmare. But the mountains stayed silent. As dawn crept toward the horizon, turning the storm clouds a muted iron gray, Claire stared at the map again, eyes fixed on the red circle marking the abandoned campsite. The searchers were already climbing. And soon, Claire would learn what else they found there. Tracks that led nowhere. Morning light broke weakly over the Smoky Mountains, painting the soaked earth in bruised shades of brown and gray. Claire followed Ranger Lewis up the narrow trail, heart pounding with every step. The storm had settled into a thin mist that clung to branches and drifted between trunks like restless spirits. The abandoned campsite lay ahead, cordoned off with yellow tape. 4 rangers stood nearby, speaking in low tones. As Claire approached, conversation stopped. That silence terrified her more than anything else. Lewis guided her closer. We already photographed everything. I just want you to see it yourself, so you understand why we're treating this seriously. Claire nodded, though her stomach twisted hard. The campsite was small, just a patch of flattened earth surrounded by pine needles. A charred circle of rocks marked where a fire had been hastily extinguished, smoke still faintly clinging to the air. A tarp lay half buried under debris, its edges torn as if ripped free in a rush. What happened here? Claire whispered. Lewis crouched near a scorched strip of paper pinned under a stone. Carefully, he lifted it with gloved hands. This looks like part of a note, he said. We believe Daniel wrote it. Claire leaned in. Half the page was burned, leaving only jagged words on the surviving piece. Not safe, someone. Keep moving, don't trust. The sentence ended where the flames had eaten through. Her breath caught. Someone? Someone what? Someone following them? We don't know, Lewis replied quietly, but the rest of the site raises more questions. He led her toward a clump of bushes. Evan's backpack, bright blue, torn along one strap, lay half hidden beneath branches. The zipper was broken. The side pocket was ripped. Claire pressed a hand to her chest. Evan would never leave his pack. We believe it was torn off, Lewis said. Possibly during a fall or... His voice faded, unwilling to commit to darker possibilities. We found no blood. No signs of an animal encounter. But we did see this. He pointed at a tree trunk. Deep scratch marks ran down the bark, long, uneven, desperate. Claire reached out and traced them with trembling fingertips. Evan's height, she whispered. This is his height. Lewis nodded grimly. We think he grabbed it to stop himself from sliding or being pulled. Claire turned sharply. Pulled? By what? He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward a muddy patch of ground nearby. We did find footprints. 2 sets, 1 adult, 1 child. They walked side by side for a while. Then the tracks split. Split? Claire asked. The child tracks veered off the trail. The adult tracks stayed straight. After about 10 feet, both sets just vanish. Claire stared at him. Tracks don't just vanish. They do, Lewis said, if the storm hits hard enough. Or if the ground gives way. Claire's breath shortened. Are you saying one of them fell? We're considering every scenario. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the woods. The tall pines towered like silent witnesses, their branches sagging with rain. Mist hid the forest floor in pale ribbons, erasing distance, swallowing shapes. Why would Daniel write a note like that? She murmured. He's been anxious, but never paranoid. Lewis hesitated. Was your husband dealing with any personal stress recently? Claire stiffened. Images flickered, late-night calls, missing money, the distant look in Daniel's eyes. Yes, she admitted. But he wouldn't hurt Evan. He wouldn't run from anything with our son. Lewis studied her expression. We're not ruling out the possibility that someone else was out here. But we found no additional tracks. So what now? Claire whispered. We expand the search, he said. But I won't lie to you. The storm erased most evidence. We're working with fragments. Claire knelt beside Evan's backpack, fingers brushing the torn strap. It felt like touching a ghost. She looked up at Lewis, eyes burning. Find them. Whatever it takes. He nodded and signaled his team. As Claire watched the rangers disappear deeper into the forest, the mist seemed to thicken, curling around the trees like a warning. Because the next discovery, the one waiting just beyond the ridge, would change everything. The farther Claire climbed toward the ridge, the darker the sky became, as if the storm itself had been waiting for her. Wind hissed through the trees, bending branches and shaking loose droplets that fell like cold needles on her face. The rangers moved ahead with measured caution, but Claire followed close behind, her breath unsteady and her thoughts spiraling. They had barely reached the halfway point when thunder cracked across the valley, rolling through the forest like an angry warning. Ranger Lewis raised a hand. We need to hurry, he said. Weather's about to turn again. Claire's boots sank into the mud as she stepped forward. You said there was something else you found. Lewis hesitated, glancing toward a narrow slope to the right. Yes. But we want you prepared before you see it. I'm already prepared, she insisted, though her voice trembled. Show me. Lewis nodded grimly and led her along a steep path. The mist thickened, swirling around them in ghost-like sheets. Claire clung to a tree trunk as she climbed, nearly slipping. When they reached a small clearing, she froze. There, carved deep into the earth, were long drag marks, 2 parallel grooves stretching toward the edge of the ridge. Nearby, the remains of a tarp were tangled around broken branches, like something or someone had been dragged violently before the storm washed most details away. Claire swallowed hard. What happened here? Lewis crouched beside the marks. We're still analyzing, but it appears something heavy was pulled through this area. The depth suggests significant force. Claire felt her chest tighten. Was it Daniel? Or Evan? We don't know, Lewis answered gently. But the direction leads toward the ridge. And with the storm, the trail beyond this point is even worse. Lightning flashed, illuminating the jagged cliffside just ahead. Claire's knees weakened. She imagined Daniel and Evan struggling, one dragging the other, panic in their voices, rain drowning out their cries. What else did you find? She whispered. Lewis motioned toward another ranger, who held up a sealed evidence bag. Inside, a small metal object glinted dully. Claire recognized it instantly. That's Daniel's compass. Her stomach dropped. He carried that compass on every hike since college. It was clipped to his belt, never removed. It was found about 20 feet from the drag marks, Lewis explained. It looks like it snapped off during whatever struggle occurred. Claire gripped her arms to steady herself. He wouldn't drop it. Not unless something forced him to. The wind howled, whipping her hair across her face. She stared at the compass, imagining Daniel's trembling hands. What had chased them? Who had Daniel feared enough to write a warning note about? Lewis stood and looked toward the ridge. We're looking into all possibilities, Claire. We're not assuming foul play, but we can't rule it out. Claire pressed her lips together. The storm suddenly smelled metallic, like electricity and dread. She stepped closer to the edge, peering over, but clouds swallowed everything beneath. The drop was steep, merciless. Could either of them have fallen? She asked. Lewis sighed heavily. Yes. It's possible. The ridge is dangerous, especially in bad weather. But someone dragged something, Claire protested. People don't drag their loved ones over cliffs. Not like this. Lewis exchanged a glance with another ranger. There's another angle we're considering. Something you mentioned earlier. Claire stiffened. Daniel's behavior. Yes. His anxiety, the late calls, the secrecy. We need to ask, could Daniel have been running from something? Or someone? Claire's throat tightened. Memories surfaced uninvited. Daniel sitting awake at 3 a.m., staring at the window. The locked glove compartment she once caught him opening. The unexplained deposit withdrawals. His sudden insistence on taking Evan for a long hike. Just us, no distractions. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know anymore. Thunder boomed directly overhead, cutting through the tension. The ranger team began packing up equipment. We need to get down before the storm traps us, Lewis said. We'll resume at dawn. Claire stared once more at the drag marks, at the compass, at the storm swallowing the mountains whole. Something awful had happened here, something deliberate, something desperate. And as she followed the rangers down the darkening trail, one terrifying question repeated in her mind with every step. If Daniel was running from someone, who was he running from? The answer would arrive a month later. From a man who claimed Daniel owed him everything. Days turned into weeks. Claire Mercer's world became a routine of unanswered calls, missed messages, and the endless drone of worry. The search had yielded little more than torn fabric, deep scratches on trees, and Daniel's broken compass. Each day without news twisted her stomach tighter, leaving her sleepless and hollow-eyed. The stormed ridges, the drag marks, and the vanished tracks haunted her dreams. At home, silence pressed down like a physical weight. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. She poured coffee endlessly, washed dishes repeatedly, and scanned the horizon from her bedroom window, hoping for some sign of them, some clue that Daniel and Evan were still alive. Even her neighbor's kindness felt distant. They didn't understand that the world outside her house had stopped, frozen with her missing family. Then, one evening, a man called the house. Claire answered cautiously, hand trembling over the receiver. "Hello. Mrs. Mercer?" The voice was low, calm, and unfamiliar. "My name is Jonas Hale. I knew your husband." He paused. "It's about money. Daniel owed me." Claire's stomach clenched. What does that have to do with my family?" Her voice shook, though she tried to steady it. "Everything," Jonas said. "He went up into the mountains, and he wasn't coming back without me finding him." Claire dropped the phone into her lap, staring at it as if it might explode. She felt the old fear of Daniel's secretive behavior crawl through her. Late-night calls, the locked glove compartment, sudden cash withdrawals, all of it suddenly made sense. Or at least made a horrifying pattern she hadn't wanted to see. Over the next week, Jonas's words gnawed at her. Investigators traced him, found he had a murky past, connections to financial fraud, and a temper that could turn violent. But no one could confirm he had any direct involvement in Daniel or Evan's disappearance. Still, Claire couldn't stop thinking about him. Every knock at the door, every passing car, made her heart leap into her throat. Meanwhile, the search teams continued methodically, but the rugged terrain and recent storms made progress painfully slow. Helicopters scoured the ridges, dogs sniffed through dense undergrowth, yet all they returned were fragments. A piece of backpack fabric, a shattered water bottle, a few scattered footprints that vanished into mud. No clear leads, no signs of life. The media began circling, publishing sparse updates. Father and son missing in Smoky Mountains. Search continues despite storms. Mystery deepens over vanished family. Claire avoided the news, fearing what they might print. She didn't need reporters to tell her that every minute that passed lessened the chances of finding her loved ones alive. By the end of the month, Claire's hope had become fragile, almost translucent. Nights were the worst. She would lie awake, replaying the events in her mind, imagining Daniel and Evan trapped in a hidden canyon, or worse. Every sound outside, the wind rattling the windows, the creak of a branch, felt like a signal, a clue, a whisper from the mountains themselves. Then, one morning, a ranger called her in an urgent tone. "Mrs. Mercer, we found someone. You need to come immediately." Claire's heart stopped. "Who? Where?" Her voice shook uncontrollably. "Evan. Alone," the ranger said. "He's holding something. Your husband's jacket." Her hands flew to her mouth. Time seemed to freeze. Tears blurred her vision as she scrambled into her car, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. The months of silence, of emptiness, of unanswered questions, all led to this moment. Somehow, after 30 days in the unforgiving mountains, Evan was alive. But something in the way the ranger said his name, the way the wind whipped around the trees, told her that the boy she would soon see had changed forever. The mountains hadn't given him back the same son she remembered. And what he carried in his hands, the jacket, mud-stained and torn, would be the first clue of the nightmare he had survived. The forest seemed endless, a tangle of mist and mud, yet somehow Evan Mercer had survived it alone. When the ranger first spotted him, he was crouched beneath a thin pine tree, shivering, his small hands clutching the mud-streaked jacket that had belonged to his father. His clothes were torn, and his hair was matted with rain and dirt, but his eyes, wide, unblinking, held something more than fear. They held a story he wasn't ready to tell. Claire ran the last few yards toward him, slipping on wet leaves, calling his name until her voice was raw. "Evan! Evan, it's okay. I'm here." She threw her arms around him. He sagged against her, trembling violently, as if her presence alone could anchor him to the world he had fought so hard to survive. Ranger Lewis followed close behind. "We've been searching for hours." "How long were you out here?" he asked gently. Evan didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on the jacket in his hands. "Dad?" he whispered, voice small and hoarse. "Dad." Claire pressed her lips to his hair. "I know, baby, I know. He's gone, but you're safe now. You're okay." Her words felt hollow even to her own ears, because deep down she knew this was only the beginning. Something had broken in those mountains, and she couldn't yet understand how much. The rescue team guided them to the waiting vehicle. Evan moved stiffly, as if the very act of walking hurt him, his small fingers never leaving the worn fabric of Daniel's jacket. Claire draped a blanket around his shoulders, brushing mud from his face, her tears mingling with rain-soaked strands of hair. "You held on to this," she said softly, touching the jacket. "All this time?" Evan nodded once, not lifting his eyes. He murmured something incoherent about keeping him safe and finding help, but the words were garbled, tangled in exhaustion and trauma. At the hospital, nurses wrapped him in dry clothing, gave him warm tea, and checked for injuries. Claire stayed beside him, holding his hand, whispering reminders of the life waiting for him beyond the mountains. Yet, every so often he would clutch the jacket tighter, rocking slightly as if the world outside were dangerous, unpredictable, and waiting to take what remained of him. A psychologist was called in to help him process what had happened. "Evan," she began gently, "can you tell us what happened out there?" He shook his head violently. "I can't," he said. "I can't. Don't ask." His words were fragile, carrying the weight of months spent alone, of nights hiding, of fears too terrible to name. Claire squeezed his hand, fighting the lump in her throat. "It's okay, baby. You don't have to talk yet. Just rest." She felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that he was alive. Dread because she knew, somewhere inside, he was carrying secrets that could unravel everything they thought they knew about Daniel, about the mountains, and about the events that had led to this disappearance. Ranger Lewis stayed in the room, carefully documenting evidence. Muddy footprints on the jacket, rips in the fabric, faint stains that might yield clues. Even after a month, the mountains had preserved fragments of the truth. He glanced at Claire, who sat silently beside her son, exhausted, tear-streaked, and yet painfully alert. "He survived," Lewis said. "But we need to know what happened before we can understand why." Evan's eyes, red and hollow, flicked toward the jacket again. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of medical equipment. He clutched the fabric like a lifeline, the only connection to the father who had vanished, the father who had terrified him, the father he both feared and loved. As night fell outside, Claire brushed his hair back and whispered, "You're safe now, Evan. We'll figure everything out together." Yet she knew the truth would not come easily. And the next step, the revelations he refused to voice, would push them all into a darker, more dangerous reality. Because what Evan was holding, the jacket, the memories, the fear, was only the beginning of a story he refused to tell. And soon, that silence would break. Evan sat on the edge of the hospital bed, shoulders hunched, jacket clutched tightly against his chest. Claire hovered nearby, never letting go of his hand, but even her presence seemed unable to pull him from the fortress of silence he had built over a month of fear and isolation. He looked small, fragile, a boy carved from worry and exhaustion, yet his eyes held a depth no child should carry. The psychologist, Dr. Meredith, spoke gently. "Evan, I know you've been through something terrifying. You don't have to tell me everything at once. But can you tell me a little about what it was like out there?" Evan shook his head violently, hair flopping across his eyes. "I can't," he whispered, voice trembling. I promised I wouldn't." He hugged the jacket closer, burying his face in the worn fabric. His words were barely audible over the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Claire's hand tightened around his. "Evan, honey, you're safe now. No one's going to hurt you. You can tell us. You can tell me anything." He looked at her then, eyes wide, glassy and haunted. "Mom, you wouldn't understand. You'd hate him if you knew." The words sliced through the room, quiet but heavy, full of guilt and fear. Daniel's name hovered unspoken in the air, a ghost they both knew but dared not confront fully. Dr. Meredith leaned forward slightly. "We're not here to judge anyone. We just want to make sure you're okay. Can you tell me anything at all about your father?" Evan pressed his forehead to the jacket, rocking slightly. He wasn't himself. Not like the dad I knew. Something was wrong. And I tried to make him stop, but his voice broke. He couldn't finish the sentence. The room held its breath, waiting for him to continue, but the words never came. Claire fought to keep tears from spilling. Her son was protecting someone, or perhaps himself, from something far worse than she could imagine. Evan, you don't have to be afraid anymore. We'll help you. You won't be alone. He shook his head again. I can't tell anyone. I promised. His small hand squeezed the jacket as if it could absorb all the danger, all the secrets, all the fear he had carried alone in the mountains. He refused to meet her gaze, refused to explain the strange scratches, the drag marks, the notes, or the terror he had witnessed. It was as if speaking aloud could make the horror real again. Ranger Lewis, who had been documenting the jacket and Evan's belongings, approached carefully. Evan, he said softly, we just want to make sure you're okay. No one is here to hurt you. But we need to understand what happened to find your father. Evan flinched. I can't. You don't understand. His words trailed off, a string of terrified syllables, a warning and a confession tangled together. The weight of the mountains, the storm, the vanished father, all pressed down on him. Claire held his hand tighter, whispering, It's okay. Well, wait. You don't have to talk until you're ready. Just know we love you. We're here. Hours passed. The hospital room filled with the hum of machines, the rustle of sheets, the occasional knock of a nurse entering with supplies. But Evan remained silent, clutching the jacket like a lifeline, eyes fixed somewhere distant, seeing what no one else could see, carrying truths too heavy for a child. And yet, in his silence, the pieces of the mystery began to form, broken fragments of notes, torn fabric, scratches on trees, drag marks in the mud, all pointing to something darker than anyone had imagined. Something Daniel had feared, and something Evan had survived. Claire watched him and realized, with a sharp pang in her chest, that the boy before her was holding more than memories. He was holding the truth. And that truth, when it finally came, would unravel everything she thought she knew about her husband, the mountains, and the terror they had endured. Because some secrets refused to stay buried. And soon they would emerge. The half-burned note had become the centerpiece of the investigation. Claire stared at the fragile fragments, pieced together on a table in the evidence room, and shivered. The words, jagged and incomplete, hinted at fear, urgency, and danger. Not safe, keep moving, don't trust. The rest had been devoured by fire. Whoever had tried to burn it clearly hadn't succeeded. But what they had left behind was enough to stir dread in the heart of anyone who read it. Ranger Lewis traced the charred edges with a gloved finger. It appears Daniel wrote this, he said, or at least tried to. But handwriting experts think someone may have forced him, or altered the message. He looked at Claire. There's more going on here than a lost hike. Claire's chest tightened. She had known Daniel's secrets ran deep, but now she felt them pressing against her, suffocating and invisible. Late-night calls, missing money, anxious glances, all of it pointed to a life she barely understood. Who would force him? She asked, voice trembling. Who could have done this to my husband, to Evan? Lewis exchanged a look with another officer. We're investigating a man named Jonas Hale. He claims Daniel owed him money. But there are gaps in his story, and his history suggests he's capable of more than just financial disputes. Claire pressed her lips together. She remembered the phone call, Jonas's calm, measured tone, and the subtle threat beneath it. The voice that had whispered danger, now lurking behind every corner of her mind. Meanwhile, the investigation uncovered Daniel's long-hidden past. A juvenile incident from years ago, sealed in court records, hinted at anger issues and impulsive behavior. Not violent enough to predict tragedy, authorities said, but enough to raise questions about what he might have done if pushed to his limits. Claire felt her hands shake. Daniel's distant stares, his sudden obsession with taking Evan to that ridge, suddenly made sense, or at least suggested something she had been too afraid to admit, that Daniel might have been running, hiding, or defending something, maybe someone. Evan remained silent, clutching the jacket, his eyes distant. Whenever Claire tried to ask, he flinched, looking past her into the forest as if the trees themselves held witnesses to what he could not speak. She realized that he carried pieces of the mountain's dark secrets, fragments of terror that would not leave him until he told the truth. Lewis pointed toward the trail map laid out on the table. We've retraced the path. The half-burned note, the torn backpack, the scratches on trees, they all line up along this ridge. Something or someone was following them, and Daniel knew it. That's why he wrote the note, left the campsite, tried to protect Evan. Claire swallowed hard. But why? Why would someone want them, or him? We don't know yet, Lewis admitted. But the pieces suggest they weren't alone. That ridge isn't forgiving. Any small misstep could have been fatal, and the tracks we found suggest there was a struggle. Claire's mind raced. The torn fabric, the drag marks, the vanished footprints, they were no longer just signs of accident. They were evidence of desperation. Someone had been watching, waiting, manipulating, and maybe even threatening the Mercer family before the storm, before the mountains swallowed them whole. She looked at Evan. The boy seemed smaller somehow, shadows under his eyes, fingers gripping the jacket until the seams strained. In his silence, the truth waited, buried like the secrets in the pines surrounding them. And Claire understood with chilling clarity that the boy's memories were the only path to the answers they needed. But those memories would not come easily. Evan's mind had locked away fragments of horror, fragments that even he was afraid to confront. The investigators, the psychologists, and Claire herself could only wait, piecing together the story from what remained, the charred note, the jacket, the marks on the earth. And soon, when Evan began to remember, when his fear and guilt broke through his silence, they would uncover the full depth of what had happened on that ridge, the fight, the flight, the desperate choices that had shaped the past month. Because the mountains held more than storms and shadows. They held the truth Evan had buried deep beneath the pines. Evan sat on the edge of the hospital bed, staring at the forest through the rain-streaked window. His fingers traced the seams of Daniel's jacket, worn thin from weeks of clutching it like a lifeline. The jacket smelled of earth, smoke, and something faintly metallic, a scent that transported him back to the ridge, to the narrow clearing where the nightmare had begun. Dr. Meredith had suggested revisiting memories gently, using small triggers, and now she sat across from him, notebook in hand, voice low and steady. Evan, let's try something simple. Can you tell me about the clearing? What do you remember first? He swallowed hard. His throat tightened as visions surged unbidden, the sun cutting through mist, the forest floor slick with rain, shadows shifting between trees. He could hear Daniel's voice, urgent, trembling. Evan, keep moving, don't stop. He began, voice barely above a whisper. I was there. We stopped. He was screaming at me. Something was behind us. Claire leaned closer, gripping his hand. It's okay, baby. You're safe now. Tell me what happened next. He shook his head, trying to push the memory away, but it was relentless. He told me to run. He wanted me to go without him. I didn't want to leave him. I couldn't. His eyes filled with tears, the first one since the rescue. And then I saw someone, or something, between the trees. It moved fast. I thought it was going to take him. Dr. Meredith nodded gently. It's okay. Keep going. What happened after that? Evan's hands trembled, gripping the jacket tighter. Dad, he pushed me. I didn't want to go. He grabbed me, yelling, and I think I made him fall. Claire's heart stopped. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to steady her breath. Dr. Meredith placed a calm hand on Evan's arm. Listen, Evan. It's okay. You didn't mean it. Just tell me what you saw. The boy's voice quivered. He fell over the edge. I ran like he told me. I thought he'd be okay. I thought he would get back up. Silence filled the room. The hum of machines seemed unbearably loud. Claire couldn't speak. Her son's confession was heavy, but in his eyes was a flicker of something she hadn't seen before, guilt, terror, and a terrifying clarity. He had survived. But what had truly happened in that clearing, what he remembered now, was only the beginning. Ranger Lewis, standing by the doorway, took careful notes. The drag marks, the torn fabric, the charred note, all began to align with Evan's recollection. The forest had held the evidence like a dark witness, and now, piece by piece, the The story was emerging. Evan swallowed, looking back toward the jacket. I held his jacket for a month. I didn't want anyone to think he wasn't coming back. His voice cracked. I thought if I kept it, maybe someone would find it and know he was still with me. Claire pulled him into her arms, rocking him gently. She whispered over and over, assuring him it wasn't his fault. But the forest, the clearing, the ridge, they had imprinted themselves permanently onto his mind. The mountains had witnessed terror and desperation, and the boy carried it like a scar on his soul. Dr. Meredith wrote in her notebook, eyes meeting Claire's briefly. Evan is beginning to tell the truth, she said. Fragments, yes, but it's a start. And with these memories, we may finally understand what happened to Daniel. Evan's gaze drifted back to the window, where the trees swayed in the wind. I want to find him, he whispered. I need to know if he's okay. Claire hugged him tighter, heart heavy. We will, Evan. We'll find out everything. I promise. Because the next step, the ridge, the struggle, the hidden edge, would finally reveal the truth about the father he thought he had lost. The ridge waited. Evan could still see it in his mind's eye, jagged rocks jutting from the mist, trees bending under wind, shadows twisting like silent watchers. Every step he had taken in the past month, through hospitals, interviews, and therapy sessions, had led back to that clearing, that edge of the mountain where the world had tilted on its axis and he had lost his father. Claire stood behind him now, hand on his shoulder, guiding him through the photographs Lewis had taken of the site. They showed the drag marks, the torn backpack, the half-burned note. Each image was a ghost of the ridge, a fragment of the terror he had survived. Evan's fingers trembled as he traced them. He could almost feel the damp earth beneath his hands, the slick mud that had clung to his shoes, the wind that had driven rain into his eyes. That's it, he whispered, voice breaking. That's where it happened. Dad. His words trailed off, caught in a storm of guilt, fear, and love. He refused to speak his father's name too loudly, as if doing so might summon the memories in full force. Claire knelt beside him, voice steady but gentle. You were brave, Evan. You followed his instructions. You survived. That's all that matters right now. She brushed a strand of hair from his face. We're going back carefully. We need to understand. For him, for you. Ranger Lewis unfolded a detailed map of the ridge, pointing to a narrow path barely visible in aerial shots. This is the route Daniel and Evan took, he explained. We've cross-referenced footprints, tree marks, and the location of the tarp. Everything leads to this clearing. He glanced at Evan. You've remembered the critical points. That helps us know where to focus. Evan's stomach tightened. His chest felt hollow. The place had been alive with danger, shadows moving faster than he could comprehend, wind howling like a predator. He closed his eyes briefly and felt it all. The push, the scramble, the moment Daniel had gone over the edge, or so Evan had feared. I'm scared, he admitted, voice barely audible. Scared to see what I don't want to remember. Claire hugged him tightly. It's okay to be scared. We'll take it one step at a time. No one's rushing you. But if we face it, maybe we can finally understand what happened to your dad. Lewis added, we'll document everything carefully. You don't have to touch anything. Just guide us with your memories. The forest outside seemed to shiver in agreement. The mist that had once swallowed them whole drifted across the photographs, curling around the edges of the map as if it, too, remembered. Evan nodded, clutching Daniel's jacket one last time before setting it aside. The fabric smelled of rain, mud, and memory. It had been his lifeline, his tether to reality during the month of silence. Now, leaving it behind, even temporarily, felt like stepping into a shadow he had spent weeks avoiding. This is it, he whispered. The place I feared the most. Claire pressed a hand to his back. And we're going to see it together. Step by step. Whatever we find, we'll face it together. Because on that ridge, at that clearing, the story would finally start to reveal itself. The truth behind the storm, the notes, the struggle, and Daniel's ultimate fate. And soon, they would confront it all. The jacket smelled of earth and rain, mud and smoke, and something faintly metallic that Evan could never quite identify. For a month, it had been his shield, his comfort, and his only connection to Daniel. Even after the hospital, even after therapy sessions, he refused to let it go. It had absorbed his fear, his guilt, his desperate hope, and somehow, it had kept him tethered to reality when everything else in the mountains had tried to swallow him whole. Claire watched him from across the room. "Evan," she said softly, "maybe it's time to set it down. You've held on for so long." Evan shook his head violently, clutching the jacket tighter. "No. I can't. Not yet. If I let go, he'll be gone forever. I'll be alone." His voice cracked, a mixture of fear and love so intense it made Claire's chest ache. She knelt beside him and tried to meet his eyes. "You're not alone. I'm here. We're going to find out what happened to him. You don't have to carry it alone anymore." The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain, a combination that seemed to echo the forest outside. Ranger Lewis stepped closer, carefully documenting the jacket in its current state. Mud streaks, small tears along the seams, faint blood stains that hadn't been noticed before. "This jacket tells a story," he said quietly. "The holes, the rips, the fabric worn through, these aren't just signs of weather. They mark the struggle, the movement, the moments that changed everything." Evan pressed the jacket to his chest again. "It's all I have. It's the only thing left from Dad that feels real. Everything else is gone." Claire swallowed hard. She could feel the weight of months of silence, the invisible mountain pressing down on them. "I know, baby. I know. And that's why we need to pay attention to it. This jacket, it's going to help us understand. Piece by piece. Step by step." Dr. Meredith nodded, sitting across from him. "Evan, holding on to it is okay. But maybe it's time to start letting it speak for him. You don't have to tell us everything. You just need to let it show us what happened." Evan hesitated, eyes wide, gripping the worn fabric as if it could slip through his fingers at any second. He slowly unzipped the front, revealing pockets, a small stain inside, and the familiar smell of pine and dirt. Every crease, every frayed edge, was a memory. A moment he had preserved. Ranger Lewis carefully lifted the jacket, examining the interior. "Look at this," he said. "The pockets, the lining, there's something hidden here. Something Daniel tried to protect. Maybe a map, or a note, or evidence of what he feared the most." Evan's eyes widened. That's his secret," he whispered. "He wanted me to have it if anything happened. I didn't know what it meant. But I held it. I didn't let it go." Claire held his hand tighter, voice trembling. "And now, Evan, it's time to see what he left behind. The jacket, your bravery, and your memory of him, they'll guide us to the truth." Evan took a deep breath, finally loosening his grip just enough for Lewis to examine it fully. The weight of months, of fear, and of hope shifted slightly, as if releasing the fabric allowed the story to begin revealing itself. Because within that jacket, mud-stained, torn, and soaked with the history of the mountains, lay the first clue that would unravel the mystery of what happened on the ridge. The footage was grainy, shot from a weathered trail camera mounted on a pine tree near the ridge. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, just wind-stirred branches, rain-soaked needles, and mist curling like smoke. But Ranger Lewis knew better. He had combed through hours of recordings, slow motion, frame by frame, searching for anything that could explain the month-long disappearance of Daniel and Evan Mercer. Claire stood behind him, heart hammering. Every image brought back the months of silence, the empty house, the unanswered questions, and the boy she had barely recognized when he was finally found. Evan sat on a chair nearby, clutching Daniel's jacket to his chest, eyes flicking between the screen and the floor. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just watched, as if the screen could somehow reveal what he had been too afraid to say. Then it appeared, a figure moving swiftly along the ridge. At first, it looked like Daniel, who'd pulled over his head, dragging a heavy bag through the mud. The movement was desperate, deliberate. But the figure hesitated, glanced over the shoulder, and froze. Another shadow moved behind him, faster, more fluid. Evan stiffened. "That's him," he whispered. The one chasing Dad." Claire pressed her hand over her mouth, feeling bile rise in her throat. "Evan," she began, voice barely audible. Lewis paused the footage and zoomed in. The second figure was taller, broader, and moved with intent. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was human. And it had been there, on that ridge, the night Daniel and Evan had vanished. Evan's small voice trembled. "Dad? He was trying to protect me. He told me to run. He told me to hide. I didn't understand at first." His hands shook as they clutched the jacket tighter. Claire knelt beside him. "It's okay, baby. You're safe now. Just tell us what you saw." He swallowed hard. The man, he wanted Dad. He was mad. Dad tried to fight him off, but he fell. He didn't mean to. He didn't know what else to do. Lewis's brow furrowed. "That aligns with the drag marks and the torn fabric we found. The note, the backpack, the scratches. It's all consistent." Claire's chest tightened. "So, all this time, someone followed them. Someone dangerous. And Dad, he saved Evan." Her voice cracked. The weight of Daniel's sacrifice pressed on her like the mountain wind, relentless and invisible. Evan's eyes filled with tears. "I held the jacket because I thought, if I kept it, maybe someone would see it. Maybe Dad wouldn't be gone completely." The camera revealed something else. A brief flicker, a glimpse of movement behind a tree, where a small, indistinct shape lingered. It wasn't Daniel, and it wasn't Evan. Something had been there, hidden from view. Something the camera almost missed. The storm, the fog, the rush of the night. They had obscured what had really happened, what no one had seen. Claire whispered, "The mountains, they hid the truth. But now," she looked at Evan, "now we can start to understand. Piece by piece." Lewis paused the footage again, framing the moment that had been invisible to search teams and invisible to the world. This is the missing piece. The part no one else saw. The reason Daniel wrote that note, the reason he tried to protect Evan, the reason the ridge holds its secrets so tightly. Evan leaned against the chair, exhausted. "I remember now, the last thing Dad said before I ran." His voice trembled. "Just protect yourself. Always survive." Claire hugged him, holding the boy and the jacket together. The footage, the notes, the torn fabric, they were no longer just fragments. They were evidence of courage, of fear, and of the desperate measures a father took to protect his son. And for the first time, Claire realized that what the camera had never shown, the moments of struggle, the decisions made in silence, was the most important truth of all. Because the full story, the hidden reality of that night, was only beginning to come into focus. The discovery came unexpectedly. Daniel's laptop, retrieved from the storage locker he had hidden in weeks before the hike, had survived the storm and the mountain's wrath. Claire and Ranger Lewis had insisted on examining it carefully, hoping for any evidence that might explain his behavior, but neither had anticipated what awaited. Evan hovered near the table, eyes wide and wary. He had already endured mountains, storms, and months of silence. This was something different. It wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't a shadowy figure in the trees. This was human, personal, and devastating. Lewis booted the laptop, its screen flickering to life. Files were scattered, partially corrupted, and time-stamped in odd sequences. Daniel's hand had clearly been in a hurry, creating folders labeled vaguely, work, personal, urgent. Claire's heart thumped as she clicked on a folder titled Hidden. "What is it?" Evan asked, voice barely audible. Claire swallowed. "I don't know yet, but we're going to see." Inside was a single video file, small, unnamed, but unmistakably familiar. The dimly lit living room of their home, the faint hum of evening television in the background, and a camera that had been hidden behind the vase on the shelf. The recording was grainy, but unmistakable. It showed her arguing with a man at the door. The tension was palpable. The words were muffled at first, but the actions were undeniable. Daniel's voice appeared suddenly raw and unfiltered, yelling, Why would you do that?" Claire froze. Memories of small quarrels, of late nights, of petty arguments she had almost forgotten, flashed through her mind. But the video showed something darker, something she had never expected. the FedEx delivery man, a stranger in the footage, leaned too close, whispered words, and before the argument could conclude, the scene escalated into something shocking. Her body recoiled on screen, responding in ways that left her frozen, ashamed, and trembling. Evan's eyes widened. Is that? Sure, Claire whispered, pressing a hand to his shoulder. Her voice shook, but her mind raced. She had always assumed the video was mundane, that Daniel's anger had been directed at work stress or minor domestic quarrels. But seeing it, knowing that Daniel had captured it, had hidden it, was different. It was a betrayal, a proof of tension, of secrets, of a trust broken and preserved in pixels. Lewis spoke carefully, tone measured. It's complicated, but it explains some of Daniel's behavior. The late-night withdrawals, the secret of planning, the sudden hikes. He was unraveling emotionally, trying to protect his family and maybe himself. Claire sat down, trembling, hugging Evan close. The boy had endured storms, mountains, and silence, but this human betrayal, cut deeper. She realized Daniel had been living a double life, one hidden beneath the veneer of fatherly protection. He had tried to shield Evan from knowledge, from the weight of adult failings, yet the mountains had demanded more than secrecy. What do we do now? She asked Lewis, voice low, almost broken. Document everything, Lewis advised. We preserve it, understand it, and use it to reconstruct the emotional and psychological environment Daniel was navigating. It may explain his decisions on the ridge, his urgency, his fear. Evan pressed his small face into Claire's shoulder. Dad, why didn't he tell us? Claire whispered, stroking his hair. Because he thought he was protecting us, baby. Even when he made mistakes, he wanted to keep you safe. The laptop hummed quietly, the video paused on the last frame. Claire recoiling, the delivery man frozen mid-motion, Daniel's shadow in the corner. The screen glowed with unspoken truth, betrayal, fear, desperation. It was human, messy, and real, the missing piece that bridged mountains, silence, and survival. And as Claire sat there, holding Evan, watching the storm clouds gather outside the window, she knew that the ridge, the jacket, the mountains, they had revealed one kind of truth. But this video, the one Daniel had hidden, the one no one had expected, would reveal another kind. The kind that would test their trust, their love, and the limits of what one could endure. The mountains loomed like silent sentinels as Claire, Evan, and Ranger Lewis returned to the ridge. The air was crisp, tinged with pine and wet earth, and the mist curled over jagged rocks like a curtain hiding the past. For a month, the ridge had held its secrets, burying them under snow, rain, and shadows. Now, armed with memories, the jacket, and the fractured truths revealed on Daniel's laptop, they were ready, or as ready as one could be, to uncover what had happened on the night that had changed their lives forever. Evan clutched the jacket one last time before placing it carefully in his backpack. It's time, he whispered, voice small but resolute. I remember now. I can guide you. Claire squeezed his hand. We'll do this together, baby. Step by step. Nothing will happen without us knowing it. Lewis led the way, tracing the narrow, mud-slick trail that had once been a route of terror. The drag marks, the torn fabric, the faint indentations in the soil, they were all still visible to the trained eye, ghosts of a night the forest had tried to erase. Evan's small hand pointed toward a jagged boulder at the far edge of the clearing. This is where it happened, he said. Claire knelt beside the spot. The earth was churned, slick with rain and decomposed leaves. Scratches on nearby trees formed a chaotic pattern, almost like a map of panic. A partially buried backpack poked out from the soil, remnants of Daniel's attempt to protect Evan, to hide what was coming. Lewis carefully dug around the backpack, uncovering a small, rusted metal box. Claire's breath caught. Could this? She began. It's possible, Lewis said softly. It looks like Daniel hid it here before the struggle. He may have thought, if anything happened, it would survive. Evan leaned closer, peering at the box. Dad, he wanted us to find this. His voice cracked. He wanted me to understand. The lid creaked open, revealing folded papers, a journal, and a small, hand-carved figure. The journal's pages were damp but legible. Daniel's handwriting scrawled across them in jagged lines, a mixture of fear, strategy, and love. He had recorded every moment leading up to the hike, his interactions with Jonas Hale, and the storm that had driven them deeper into danger. Claire unfolded a page. I cannot risk Evan's life. He must survive. Jonas doesn't understand boundaries. He doesn't care about consequences. If anything happens, the ridge will hide me, but not my son. I will protect him at all costs. Evan's eyes widened. He really tried. He really did protect me, he whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. Lewis nodded. The drag marks, the torn backpack, the mud, everything aligns. Daniel fought to shield Evan from Jonas. That's why he sent you ahead, why he stayed behind. The ridge may have taken him, but he ensured Evan's survival. Claire pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the weight of months of fear lift slightly. The jacket, the memories, the hidden video, they had all been pieces of a puzzle that now began to form a picture of courage and sacrifice. Evan crouched beside the box, gently touching the carved figure. He left me this, he said softly, so I'd remember him and know he loved me. The wind swept across the ridge, lifting mist and carrying with it the scent of wet pine. For the first time since the storm, the forest seemed to exhale. The mountains had held their secrets tightly, but now, slowly, carefully, they had begun to release them. Claire hugged Evan tightly, whispering, "Your father's love, it's here, Evan. It's always been here. And now, finally, the ridge has given us the truth." Lewis stepped back, surveying the clearing. It's over the most. But the ridge will always remember. And so will we. Evan looked up at the fog-shrouded peaks. I think he's okay now. In some ways, out with me. The mountains held their silence, the secrets of storms, shadows, and struggles finally revealed. And in that clearing, among the pines and jagged rocks, the Mercer family began to reclaim a fragile peace. The forest was quiet now, the mist curling lazily around the pines as though the mountains themselves were exhaling after a long, tense vigil. Claire and Evan stood at the edge of the clearing, the journal and carved figures safely packed in a backpack, Daniel's jacket folded neatly beside them. Ranger Lewis had begun the careful process of documenting the ridge one last time, marking evidence, sketching maps, and noting the points that had once been battlefields of fear and survival. Evan traced his fingers along the edge of a jagged rock, the memory of that night surging briefly. He shivered, but not with the cold. It was the weight of everything, the storm, the chase, his father's sacrifice. But now, standing here, he felt something else, relief. And something more fragile, yet deeper, connection. Daniel had protected him, even when the world had been at its most violent, and even when Daniel had vanished beneath the mist, the sun had survived. Claire knelt beside Evan, brushing a damp strand of hair from his forehead. "It's over, baby," she whispered. "We finally know. Your father, he did everything he could. And now, so can we." Evan nodded, though his eyes were still wide, still haunted by moments too young for him to have endured. "I keep thinking about him," he admitted. "About the ridge, about the storm, about the man who followed us. But I can also remember him smiling, teaching me, telling me to keep moving. I can feel him here." He lifted the jacket, holding it to his chest one last time. Claire wrapped her arms around him. "He's always been here, Evan. In every step you take, in every choice you make, in this jacket, this journal, even in the stories we tell." Lewis stepped closer, voice low. "The ridge may have taken him physically, but the truth, the courage, the warnings, the love he left behind, that stays. It's the echo of what happened here, and it will guide you both for the rest of your lives." Evan glanced around the clearing. The pines, the rocks, the trail, all were familiar now, yet transformed. They were no longer the terror-laden landmarks of a vanished father's last moments. They were memorials, markers of survival, and lessons in courage. "I think I understand now," he murmured. "The ridge, it was dangerous, yes. But it was also teaching me. Dad, he wanted me to survive." Claire squeezed his hand, tears threatening to spill. Yes. And you did. Every single day. You've carried his memory with bravery and love. As the wind swept across the clearing, carrying the scent of wet pine and damp earth, the forest seemed to whisper its assent. The mountains, once implacable and secretive, had released their truth slowly, one fragment at a time. Drag marks, torn fabric, charred notes, hidden videos, and a mother's unwavering persistence had pieced together a story of courage, betrayal, and sacrifice. Evan let out a deep breath, the tension in his small shoulders easing. "Do you think he knew I'd survive?" he asked softly, almost to himself. Claire hugged him tightly. "I think he believed in you more than anything. And now, Evan, you can live with that. You carry him with you, and that's something no storm, no ridge, no mountain can take away." Ranger Lewis gave a solemn nod. "We've documented everything. The evidence, the journal, the trail, all of it. The ridge has finally told its story. And we've made sure the truth will remain preserved, respected, and remembered." Evan glanced at the misted peaks one last time, inhaling deeply. The wind brushed against his face, cold but freeing, carrying away some of the fear, some of the silence that had haunted him for weeks. The mountains had tested him, pushed him to his limits, but now he felt a fragile peace settling in, a quiet acknowledgement that his father's love had guided him even in absence, and that survival was not just a matter of endurance, but of understanding and carrying forward what had been lost. Claire stood beside him, holding his hand as they began the descent from the ridge. The echoes of the mountains followed them, not as threats, but as reminders of what had been endured, survived, and revealed. And somewhere in the wind, among the pines and the jagged stones, Daniel's presence lingered, not in body, but in memory, courage, and love. The ridge had finally spoken, and the echoes would remain forever. The end.